Hello, and it's good to be with you again on this sixth Sunday after Pentecost as we think together today about the parable of the sower in the 13th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. Today we start to explore some of the parables that Jesus told, and we'll think some more in the coming weeks. Parables have often been described as earthly stories with heavenly meanings. Jesus often took the really ordinary, everyday things that he saw around him and he gave them a twist to get people's attention and to help them understand something about who God is and something about us, something about how we can actually live out the kingdom values God calls us to and be the people God created us to be. Well, today we listen to the parable of the sower. As I said, if you want to read it, it's in Matthew chapter 13. I don't know about you, but I've been hearing this parable since Sunday school days. This picture of a farmer casting seed around by hand would have been really familiar to Jesus' listeners. They would have seen it daily. No big machinery, no fancy tools on this farm. Just a basket of seed and a farmer walking around. But the two things that would have made listeners sit up and pay attention were the complete wastefulness of the farmer as he distributed the seed and the unbelievable crop that came out of his sowing. This farmer casts the seed around as if there's no tomorrow. He doesn't even try particularly to aim at the good fertile ploughed furrows, but just casts it out wastefully and indiscriminately, and it lands where it lands. There's plenty more where that came from. What farmers would do this? Seed was precious. Seed was cast carefully. So this parable tells us something important about God. God is like this farmer. But instead of wastefully casting seed around, God throws love and grace around with abandon. Love and grace are thrown out extravagantly and generously, and there's no thought to what would be profitable. In this parable of the sower, the seed lands in some awkward places. And one of the things we know from our concern for ecology is that when we fight with the environment, we lose. And the same thing happened with the seeds in the parable. Some of the seed fell on the hard path, and the ground was just too hard, and so the birds ate the seeds. Some of the seeds fell in the shallow, unprepared soil on the very edge of the field. Couldn't put strong roots down, so these little plants quickly died. Some of the seed fell in among the weeds, and it germinated, but the weeds choked them off and they died. But some seed fell into the deep, well-prepared, well-cultivated, weed-free soil, and these seeds germinated and matured and bore grain. And the harvest in Jesus' story was huge, beyond the people's imagining. Some grain brought a 30-fold harvest, some 60, and some even 100-fold. The thing that would have made Jesus' hearers sit up in disbelief was the sheer size of this harvest that the farmer gathered in. Almost a ludicrous idea that a farmer could get even a 30-fold, never mind a 100-fold crop, caught people's attention and made them listen, and too tells them something about God and about the kingdom of God. But we said before too that this parable tells us something about us and how we're to live. And the gospel compares us and our lives to the soil. We're to cultivate an openness and a receptiveness to God that is just like the good soil. We're all a mixture of rocks and thorns. We can be hard and stony, we can be rocky and prickly, and yet sometimes, just sometimes, we can be the kind of fertile ground that the sower longs for. So what can we do to help create the conditions that will make the ground of our lives become more and more fertile? Is it even possible? Sure, sometimes God just comes to us in flashes out of the blue. Any time, any place, any condition, just breaks in, meets with us, changes us. That is true. That is unchangingly true. But it's also true that if we find and make time for reflection, make time for quiet, time to read, time to pray, pay attention to that inner reflective place, then we open ourselves more and more to the possibility that we will actually notice God's breaking in when it happens. Well, then there's another thing. It doesn't stop there. We, you and me, we're called to become more and more like God, who throws grace and love around with wasteful abandonment as if there's no tomorrow, as if it has no end. Why? Because love and grace don't have an end. Because the tomorrow belongs to God. Because we are just called to share God's love and grace wastefully and with abandon. But to make this possible, we have to pay attention. We have to purposely cultivate the ground of our hearts and our lives by making the space for it, making time for prayer. Listen, says Jesus, listen. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear.